And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, we're into our 13th season of this incarnation of the Ken Hudnall Show. Over 1,300 episodes. And we're in the process of putting together call it a hub where you can get access to the books. My 112th book has just come out, as well as a lot of episodes, not only this show, but my previous shows. We're getting ready to upload those. Now, we've interviewed some totally off-the-wall people. Well, today's February the 3rd, the 34th day of this new year. Just 331 days to the year's over with, and we'll start a new one. Holidays observances. It's National Golden Retriever Day. Those friendly dogs are a popular breed for families and service work. Doggy Date Night. You know, pets bring so much joy and quality to the lives of pet owners. It's important to make sure those dogs are feeling loved and cared for. National Women Physicians Day. Excuse me. African American Coaches Day. National Cordova Iceworm Day. Yes, there's all kinds of festivals going on right now. The Cordova Iceworm Day is a celebration dedicated to one of nature's most unusual creatures, the iceworm. Found in glacial ice, these tiny dark worms thrive in conditions that would shut down most other animals, living through snow and ice as if it were perfectly normal to make a living inside a frozen world. As we delve more into the world around us, we find some of the strangest things you could ever imagine. And we're going to do shows in the future about some of those strange creatures. American Painters Day, St. Blaise's Day, National Patient Recognition Day, National Carrot Cake Day, National Wedding Ring Day, Take a Cruise Day. From dining and entertainment to sightseeing and relaxation, just enjoy the open sea, explore exotic ports of call on a dream cruise. The day the music died, that's when Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper met their fate. Their timeless music continues to inspire fans well over 60 years after their untimely deaths. They were on a tour, and it was so cold and the heater on their bus had broken. So those three chartered an airplane. Unfortunately for them, the airplane iced up and it crashed. Elmo's birthday, that furry little red monster, always bringing laughter and life lessons to kids. Feed the Birds Day, Ford Chaplin's Day. The honors a story that feels almost impossibly generous. U.S. Army chaplains representing different faith traditions chose other people's lives over their own in the worst kind of emergency. Remembered for calm leadership and a final act of shared sacrifice, they're often described as a symbol of unity when fear and chaos could have easily won out. At its heart, the observance highlights how character can show up in a crisis. They didn't have any special powers, a secret escape plan, or a miracle waiting to help them. National Missing Persons Day, shining a light on unheard stories, advocating for those lost and building awareness of missing individuals. Women's Heart Day, shape up in pickles time. It's what is this My computer seems to have developed a mind of its own. World Interfaith Harmony Week, Publicity for Profit Week, National Green Week, Artes Mundi, which goes on until March 1st, Tinnitus Awareness Week, Tapati Festival, the Venice Carnival, La Poutine Week, National Storytelling Week, Westminster Dog Show, the Tapati Rapa Nui Festival, Pay Your Bills Week, International Networking Week. Whether in person or online, networking helps build valuable relationships for personal and professional growth. Feeding Tube Awareness Week, National School Counseling Week, Pride in Food Service Week, Boy Scouts Anniversary Week, Burn Awareness Week, Solo Dinners Eat Out Week, National Patient Recognition Week, African Heritage and Health Week, Snow Sculpting Week, Cordova Iceworm Festival. Yes, there's even a festival. Goes on for an entire week. Famous people born on this date: Elizabeth Holmes. This was a slow week for births, apparently. All right. You're going to see what stories we have in the news because there's always something going on. All righty. There is a Border Patrol captain who's removed from a gas station. The gas station owner refused to assist. Ignites debate over denying service to federal agents. The owner said, "I don't support ICE." String of recent incidents in which ICE agents and Department of Homeland Security leadership have been refused service at corporate gas stations and hotel chains has raised questions about whether private businesses can lawfully deny service to federal law enforcement officers. These incidents, including ICE agents who were turned away from hotels and a Border Patrol commander who was denied service at a gas station, prompted debate over whether such refusals amount to lawful private discretion or illegal discrimination against federal law enforcement carrying out official duties. Most recent flashpoint unfolded at a Speedway gas station. Video captured by conservative activist Cam Higbee showed U.S. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino being followed out of the store by a man identifying himself as a manager. Bovino was silent on the matter when asked by Higbee among the crowd outside Speedway, while Homeland Security Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said similar situations had transpired at several different gas stations where agitators stalked the agents. You know, this is going to keep on. We're going to have what amounts to a civil war between the federal government and the agitators. Well, according to several talking heads, Democrats just handed President Trump the chance to fix immigration. Domestic governance and politics continue even as the world waits for President Trump's decision on how to best defang the reckless and bloodthirsty regime that holds the Iranian population captive. No one not in the rooms with the president and his innermost circle of advisors knows that what the options are before President Trump, or what our intelligence and military say and how our regional allies actually feel about the situation. It's a wilderness of mirrors time on all things Iran. President's resolute actions against Iran and Venezuela in 2025 ought to have earned him enormous credibility on national security decisions, unlike previous President Biden and Barack Obama, who knew only how to retreat. Presidents 45 and 47 is not the retreating type. He could, of course, disappoint and do nothing about the despots terrorizing Iranians, thereby forfeiting some, if not all, of that accumulated credit from the past year. No one can render that judgment yet, though partisans on the left are eager to class him with 44th and 46th presidents as appeasers. We don't have any idea how the crisis is going to resolve. Likely won't for weeks, if not months. But there's going to be a resolution of some sort. No question about that. Well, the massive Minnesota fraud case has put Attorney General Keith Ellison under the microscope as climate ties have resurfaced. Sweeping fraud scandals putting Minnesota Attorney General Ellison in the spotlight, reviving questions about his controversial ties to progressive environmental causes. He served as Attorney General since 2019 after more than a decade in Congress. His long-drawn conservative criticism for aligning his office with left-wing politics, from climate litigation to political fights over immigration enforcement. Now with a federal investigation underway into what prosecutors allege was a massive scheme to siphon taxpayer funds meant to feed children during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ellison is facing intensified attention, and his long-simmering controversial environmental ties are back under a harsher spotlight. State Attorney General has joined local Democrats in denouncing the fraud scandal, with Ellison calling it a truly despicable act. At the same time, he's criticizing the Trump administration, most recently for the presence of federal law enforcement in Minneapolis and the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Well, the latest flashpoint centers on Ellison's 2021 meeting with Somali community figures tied to Feeding Our Future, described by prosecutors as one of the largest pandemic-era fraud cases in the country, allegedly costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars and serving as the precursor to investigators uncovering other fraud schemes in that state. Well, when even the Attorney General is on the side of the criminals, makes it very difficult to do anything about it. Well, San Francisco has uncovered 9 secret drug and gambling dens disguised as convenience stores. San Francisco officials announced last Thursday the city's uncovered numerous secret drug and gambling dens masquerading as convenience stores, all located in the notorious downtown neighborhood, long associated with illicit activity and homelessness. At least 9 of these dens have been shut down or sued over the past 18 months in the Tenderloin. City Attorney David Chu has said. He added that the stores engaged in a range of illegal activities, including gambling operations, selling illegal drugs, possessing firearms, trafficking stolen goods, violating the city's nighttime safety ordinance, which prohibits shops from operating during late hours to deter nighttime criminal activity. According to the city attorney, these convenience stores were magnets for drug activity. In some cases, the stores were selling illegal drugs themselves. Well, you never know what you're going to find when you wander around in places like that in the dark of the night. Well, Billie Eilish has called out on her stolen land Grammy comments while owning a $1 million mansion. She was mocked as a hypocrite for declaring nobody's illegal on stolen land and F-ICE while owning a massive Hollywood property on Monday. She made these comments attacking border enforcement, immigration, and customs enforcement while accepting the Grammy for Song of the Year at the 68th Annual Grammy Awards on Sunday night. She's one of many who believe that America's stolen land. I would point out that no matter how far back in history you go, nobody had a deed to it. Folks just showed up and set up housekeeping. She's 24 years old, and of course, being like most young liberals, believes she knows everything there is to know. She's the Wildflower singer said while wearing an iced out pin, I feel really hopeful in this room, and I feel like we need to keep figuring and fighting and speaking up and protesting. Our voices really do matter, and the people matter. And F-ICE, that's all I'm going to say. Sorry. The next day, several critics, including federal lawmakers, called out the pop singer and suggested she donate her $1 million Los Angeles property back to Native Americans to return stolen land, as she called it. According to Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, any white person does a public stolen land acknowledgement should immediately give his or her land to Native Americans. Otherwise, they don't really mean it. And besides, I'm pretty sure she really didn't mean it. Let's see, Savannah Guthrie is asking for prayers as her mother remains missing. NBC Today co-host Savannah Guthrie yesterday thanked her followers for offering their prayers for her mother Nancy, who authorities say was possibly kidnapped from her home in Arizona. Nancy Guthrie, who's 84, is last seen on Saturday evening at her residence near East Skyline Drive and North Campbell Avenue, north of Tucson. It's last seen about 9:30 in the evening after family members dropped her off, according to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. In an Instagram post on Monday night, Savannah Guthrie said she believes in prayer and in God. She says, "We believe in prayer. We believe in voices raised in unison, in love and in hope. We believe in goodness. We believe in humanity. Above all, we believe in Him," she said, alongside a photo that read, "Please pray." Well, maybe they'll find her. Well, Christian investors with $4 billion launch a campaign to strip woke agendas from major corporations. Inspire Investing files 38 shareholder proposals for 2026, targeting companies to abandon progressive activism and return to political neutrality. We don't go to stores to be lectured about woke and DEI. We go to buy their products if we would like them. Corporate America's long claimed progressive social activism reflects the will of customers and shareholders. But there's a growing group of shareholders that are now pushing back against that idea. A Christian investment firm, it manages more than $4 billion in assets, is targeting dozens of major corporations this year with shareholder proposals aimed at pressuring companies to drop what it calls woke agendas, return to political neutrality, and focus on their core business, which is selling products to the American consumer, not telling the consumer how to think and what to do. Well, the NFL's Roger Goodell believes Bad Bunny understands Super Bowl 60 platform is meant to unite amid the ICE outcry. The NFL commissioner addressed questions about the Bad Bunny possibly making a political statement during a Super Bowl halftime show and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement operations during his press conference on Monday. Last year, Bad Bunny was chosen as a Super Bowl halftime show performer despite his scathing criticism of ICE. Puerto Rican music star won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year and had more criticism of ICE on stage in Los Angeles. If you want to be a singer, be a singer. If you want to be a political spokesperson, be a political spokesperson. Don't try to combine the two. Well, Palantir's Shyam Sankar says America's being lied to about AI job displacement fears. He said the American people are being lied to about AI. He's the CTO of Palantir. He warns in an open line of his new Fox News op-ed. One of the biggest lies, he says, is that artificial intelligence is coming for American jobs. Doomsday scenarios surrounding AI suggest the growth of the tool will result in job cuts because the technology will replace traditional labor. Sankar said fears about technological advancements are commonplace going back to even the 16th century. Of course, if we look through history, every time we had a new profound technology, there's an incredible amount of fear. Well, after the instructions I've had in AI, I found it an incredible assistance in getting things done. Well, according to Carol Roth, the money in your safe savings account can vanish overnight. Most Americans believe putting money with a trusted bank or credit union is safe. They can sit back and forget it. But that just might be the downfall. According to Roth, her cousin called her in a panic, put her savings into a savings account with the credit union. Her entire life savings got quarterly statements that showed monthly deposits of interest. On her third quarter 2025 statement, everything looked fine, but when she got her fourth quarter statement, the account was marked closed. Couldn't believe it. What happened to the account? Where was her money? She called the credit union. They said her account had been closed for inactivity. They closed it as a dormant account and sent the money to the state. A process known as achievement. You didn't understand. There was activity from the financial institution, interest deposits every month. To give you an idea of some of the things going on with financial institutions, I'm with a major bank. I got a call a week ago from their fraud department. They were from the Los Angeles office of their of the fraud department, and they knew more about my accounts than I did. Turned out it was a scam. They had gotten access to the bank's internal workings and were having a field day, taking money they thought they were entitled to. Well, they made one mistake. They called from their cell phone. Well, an Australian teen swims 2.5 miles for hours to save the family that had been swept out to sea. 13-year-old boy swam through rough ocean waters to save his family that they were swept out to sea off Australia's coast. For a heroic effort, police say saved his mother and 2 younger siblings. Austin Appleby recalled ditching his life jacket so it wouldn't restrict his swimming before he set off alone on a nearly 4-hour-long, 2.5-mile swim that saw him battle huge waves till he ultimately reached shore and triggered a rescue that saved his mother, Joanne Appleby, 47, his brother, Bo, 12, and his sister, Grace, 8. The waves were massive. Didn't have a life jacket. I just kept thinking, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And I finally made it to shore and hit the bottom of the beach and collapsed. The family who was visiting from Perth was using rented kayaks and paddleboards near Quindaloop in Western Australia about midday Friday when strong winds and rough seas dragged them further from shore. He initially tried to paddle for help in an inflatable kayak, but abandoned it when it began taking on water. Search helicopter found Joanne and her 2 younger children clinging to a paddleboard while wearing life jackets about 8:30 in the evening. They had drifted about 9 miles from shore and spent up to 10 hours in the water. Well, the actions of that 13-year-old boy can't be praised highly enough, according to Police Inspector James Bradley. His determination and courage ultimately saved the lives of his mother and siblings. I guess he'll get to stay up late now and watch TV. Well, another Schumer shutdown is coming. It's entered at day 4 as lawmakers gear up for a House-wide vote on a Trump-backed bill. The ongoing partial government shutdown is now on its 4th day, but House GOP leaders are confident the end is near. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican Louisiana, is aiming to hold a chamber-wide procedural vote on the Senate's funding compromise on this afternoon, teeing up a subsequent vote on final passage, possibly later in the day. Schumer needs to go back to his nursing home and sit quietly and quit bothering people trying to get work done. Well, according to Jesse Waters, Don Lemon's publicity has gone to his head. He thinks he's above the law and he can do as he pleases. And President Trump's going to meet Colombia's Petro as tensions over drugs and deportations ease up. Well, having done our news segment, let's talk about our current topic, which basically boiled down to tales of the unexplained. You know, the 3 hardest words for a human being to utter is, I don't know. We demand an accounting for every claim or experience, and no accounting is available. Somebody's going to invent one. I'm sure we've all had experiences when we've seen something totally unexplainable, and somebody explains it away as your imagination, or, like with Roswell, a weather balloon. New Hampshire man, for example, a veteran outdoorsman considered reliable by those that knew him, reported a daylight encounter with a 9-foot-tall ape-like creature. Game warden explained it away with neither investigation or specific cause. Said it was a moose walking on his hind legs, don't you know? When a number of West Texas motorists over a period of hours independently talk about close-range sightings of a 200-foot-long egg-shaped, brilliantly luminous structure, the Air Force conducted a brief inquiry and identified it as ball lightning, an allegation the national press happily endorsed. In fact, what the witnesses had described bore no resemblance to this rare aerial phenomenon. electrical storm that, according to the Air Force, had given rise to it didn't exist according to weather records. In both cases, the proposed solutions are so flimsy that you'd think it'd be easier to charge the witnesses with bald-faced lies and be done with it. Either that or diagnose them as dangerous lunatics whose vivid imagination called for their immediate sedation and hospitalization. Now, of course, if these were isolated episodes, these sorts of stories told and heard rarely are then usually from excitable to gullible people, we could probably tell ourselves, I suppose it is possible once in a great while for somebody to see a moose and mistake it for a 9-foot-tall bipedal anthropoid, or for a person to have a close view of a globe of ball lightning, ordinarily the size of a basketball, and judge it to be 200 feet in diameter. After all, where human behavior is concerned, just about anything that could happen has probably happened at one time or another. And it's just that sorts of colossal perceptual breakdowns being proposed that run as counter to the experience of most human beings, as do encounters with hairy giants in New England woods. And suppose the New Hampshire witness had seen something else, say a fugitive on the lam, reported it to the sheriff. We might assume that the sheriff wouldn't have said, without some serious inquiry and specific cause, that the witness had mistaken the moose for a man. Or more likely, the sheriff and his deputies would have raced to the scene in anticipation of making an arrest. But if we allow ourselves to believe, still in the absence of any specific evidence to the effect, that at times, even under what are thought to be good viewing conditions, a moose can look like an ape, will only be stymied if we try to employ this identification in the many places where similar apes have been reported and where moose, or in many cases any wild mammals larger than a deer, do not exist. It's not going to help us either to level indiscriminate charges of dishonesty against all witnesses wherever we find them, whether in New Hampshire or Indiana or Pennsylvania or South Dakota or Texas or British Columbia or Labrador. Just about any state or province you can name, and off-the-cuff speculations about perceptual disorders are so radical in character as to suggest mental illness and social dysfunction only takes us so far. At some point, we're going to have to listen to what the witnesses have to say. Let's talk about what I call the case of the old hag. A victim wakes up, unable to move, lies there helpless, hears footsteps, and sees a horrifying form walking close to the bed. An invisible force presses on his chest, and he thinks he's going to die. At last, he's able to shake off his paralysis, and the attack ends. Now, chances are you've never heard of an incident like this unless it's happened to you. If it has happened to you, you're not alone. There's reason to believe that 1 American in 6 has had this kind of experience. Yet it's so little discussed in our culture, it doesn't really have a name. In other cultures, that same experience is a subject of a rich folk tradition. Newfoundlanders, for example, call it the old hag, or the hags, or hagging. When it was first used in connection with these experiences, the word hag referred to witch, and a victim of hagging was thought to be hag or witch-ridden. In fact, the most common expression for the experience in English is riding. Interestingly enough, the original name is one with which we're all familiar: nightmare. Nightmare, which to most of us simply means a bad dream, once had a far more specific definition. Refer to an incubus or a succubus that came in at night and put a crushing weight on a victim's chest. Now, in an interesting book called The Terror That Comes in the Night, it was published in 1982, don't you know? Penn State folklorist and behavioral scientist David Hufford used the old hag to address a crucial question. Do people reporting first-hand experiences with anomalous and paranormal phenomena know what they're talking about? Standard wisdom holds, as we've already noted, that such experiences are the product of perceptual errors, faltering memories, lies, psychotic episodes, and hallucinations shaped by ideas in the claimant's cultural environment. Using the example of the old hag, Hufford tested his hypothesis, which, except in cases where consciously false testimonies alleged might be phrased as the believing is seeing theory. This theory proposes that individuals believe they've seen something extraordinary because society has provided them with the images that shape their imagination. After an in-depth examination of old hag accounts, both in cultures in which such beliefs are widely known and others, which they are all but unspoken of, Hufford learned that descriptions of the core experience by those who say they've had it and are strikingly consistent wherever they occur. Such experiences are not culturally determined. Recognizable old hag attacks of great complexity can and do occur in the absence of explicit models, he said. He then considered psychologists' efforts to account for the phenomenon and found them hopefully and hopelessly muddled. Of one famous psychoanalytic study, he said you can hardly distinguish the experiences themselves from their interpretations. The lack of scientific precision attributed to popular thought is found here in academic disguise. The consistent unwillingness of psychologists and other professionals to listen to these persons who have had these experiences has led them to engage in freewheeling speculation devoid of empirical justification. Subject of supernatural belief somehow leads to a lot of forgetting about what constitutes serious scholarship. And I've run into some of that when I've done research for some of the books I've written. By the way, my 112th just came out. You'll be able to access all of them on Amazon if you go to Amazon Kindle and look up Ken Hudnall. It was just such rejection of untutored observation that delayed for so long the scientific discovery of a giant squid, gorillas, meteors, and any number of other wild and wonderful but apparently unlikely facts in this world. In those cases, post hoc scientific rationalization was used to explain how people came to believe in such things. Seasoned fishermen were said to mistake floating trees with large root systems for huge animals attacking their boats. Farmers were said to have overlooked iron-bearing rocks in the middle of their fields, so they were pointed out by lightning. And in this particular case, the old hag experience, children and savages were said to have difficulty knowing when they were awake and when they were asleep, even though the victims, persons of all ages, cultures, and education levels, insist they were not dreaming, that they were fully conscious when they heard and saw what they said they did. Hufford agreed we have to take seriously the experience with stable contents, which is widespread, dramatic, realistic, and bizarre, and which is repeatedly reported by a large number of our fellow humans. Nor did he hesitate to consider the implications to his old hag research for other claims of strange experiences. He said, I think the present study has amply demonstrated that at least some apparently fantastic beliefs are in fact empirically grounded, noting that nonetheless, most scholars have acted more interested in explaining troublesome claims out of existence than in investigating them. The further they remove themselves from the data, that's the accounts of those that have had the experiences, and the more exotic, facile, and irrelevant their theories become. In Hufford's assessment, this practice amounts to careless thinking retroactively applied with little regard for evidence, or the truth for that matter. An empirically based, experience-centered approach, such as the one Hufford employed, would show, he contended, that phenomena like the old hag are believed in because they really do happen. They're not simply imagined by people who are so stupid, crazy, or credulous they can't tell the difference between a popular superstition and a personal experience. Inquirers would learn not to confuse folk explanation, for example, the notion that witches cause old hag attacks, with folk observation, which, as Hufford demonstrated, can be quite accurate, consistent, and scientifically valuable. Hufford's arguments brings revolutionary implications in its assertion that rational people are accurately reporting experiences that at least appear to be extraordinary, and that those who've attempted to explain away such accounts have failed to make their case nor even understood what they were trying to explain. As a consequence, scholars have failed to come to grips with a significant part of the human experience. So can the old hag experience be accounted for in non-paranormal terms? If you draw on findings from sleep research conducted in later years, Hufford concluded that the state in which this experience occurs is probably best described as sleep paralysis with a particular kind of hypnagogic hallucination. In other words, science can explain how somebody could wake from sleep, be unable to move, and have a frightening experience. but he can't explain the fact that the contents of that experience are consistent no matter whom or in what cultural environment they occur. The mystery can't be solved in Hubbard's informed estimation on the basis of current knowledge. We don't know everything, and if things are going on we just cannot explain. When the experience of hairy bipeds and UFOs and lake monsters or other anomalous entities or objects is concerned, you don't have to believe in or even have heard of such things to see them. Isolated folk of early 20th century Newfoundland had never before heard about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Names didn't come into popular currency until decades later on the other side of the continent. Even so, they reported seeing man-like entities they called Indians. Few of the Newfoundlanders knew what a real Indian looked like, but that was the name they attached to the creatures that other North Americans who had never heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch either were calling wild men or gorillas. In our time, even when such phenomena are staples of popular culture, it's still possible to find occasional individuals who've never heard of, for example, a UFO. But they report unusual experiences with what they may interpret as everything from secret airplanes to demons. These interpretations aside, of course, they relate sights or occurrences that are in every way congruent with those experienced by more culturally sophisticated observers. Witnesses and all for say, I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't seen it myself. A statement that certainly carries a great deal of meaning in this context. And there are some things people believe in not because they're ignorant and credulous or crazy, but because either they or persons they trust see them. Frankly, seeing is believing. Historically, photographs alleged to be of extraordinary anomalies are more likely not to be bogus or at least suspect. Serious Sasquatch researchers reject as inauthentic most, although not all, photographs and films said to depict the creature. Probably more than 90% of all UFO photos are of dubious provenance. Some of the most spectacular footages of Loch Ness monsters known or suspected to be fake. The debut and the debate about photographic evidence of these kinds of phenomena centers on a surprisingly small number of recorded images. Unfortunately, these strange creatures don't appear to like to pose for photographs. And who walks around with a camera in their hand all the time anyway? Sometimes, in fact, critics act as if the paucity of arguably authentic photos amounts to evidence against the reality of these sorts of phenomena. This argument, though, is not particularly compelling when you consider that nearly all anomalous encounters occur abruptly and occasional emotions ranging from deep shock to sheer terror. Usually, the duration of these experiences can be measured in seconds. These are not conditions conducive to the accumulation of a large body of photos and video images. That's why so few reputable pictures of ball lightning, a strange natural phenomenon whose reality most physicists and meteorologists no longer dispute. One of the perversities of anomalies research that the fuzzier the image, the more likely it represents something real, inasmuch as the circumstances that cause photographs to be rare are the same ones that are more likely to cause them to be unclear. Pictures taken hastily by individuals with shaking hands don't produce the sharpest of images, and hoaxers who seek attention or profit know that photographs like these won't get them anywhere. Fuzzy images are such a feeble variety of evidence that witnesses who trumpet them are only asking for yet more ridicule to be heaped on their heads. Some tales marketed as true mysteries begin less as hoaxes than as jokes or science fiction. In other words, the tales that, though they may not have been intended to be taken seriously, took on lives of their own, and over the decades reincarnated in print as records of events that it was assumed somebody somewhere had validated. Two of the most notorious mysterious disappearance cases ever feature victims usually identified as either David Lang or Oliver Lurch. Like true folk tale names and details sometimes change in the telling. Well, by now their origins either are known or murky. It's certain that neither man ever lived, much less left the planet in such singular fashion. We're talking about a story about a man walking across his field who just disappears while being watched by his family from the front porch and somebody who's coming to call on him from the road. When they got there, where the man was last seen, there was no hole, there was no sign of anything to do with the man. They never were found. Other mysteries arise from imaginative interpretations of events that, if unusual, not so bizarre as they're made to seem. These sorts of pseudo-mysteries flourish in part because people are drawn to exotic novelties and, moreover, enjoy being scared in comfort and safety. The many, mostly trashy pseudo-documentaries that play in endless rotation on cable television cater to these familiar human sentiments. Few people possess the specialized knowledge that would expose the foolish or careless assertions of the mystery mongers. And behind the hoaxes and the legends are the occasional misperceptions and the honest mistakes. No conscientious investigator embarks on his or her labors without considering these possibilities and pursuing them actively. And neither, though, will he or she force them on the data if they manifestly fail to fit. Some witnesses, though not so many as popular lore would lead one to think, are mentally unwell. A deeper reason for skepticism has to do with the nature of the more fantastic claims. Many reports attest to beings, creatures, and occurrences if established as real would rewrite science's map of reality. Some would shake the foundations of consensus reality. In short, what's being alleged is nothing to be taken lightly. The implications are enormous. Because the stakes are high, we do well to be cautious, very cautious. After all, you don't redefine the world on nothing more than the word, however sincere it may appear, of sailors and shore dwellers who swear that they've seen merbeings. No biological principle, or even conceivable biological principle, allows us to believe in beings or animals that are half fish and half human, even in creatures that look as if they could be half fish and half human. Just as unlikely are fairies, though first-person sightings reports, and no small number, have been logged over the centuries. There's several books out about the people's experiences in the fairy realm. In a handful of cases, they're preserved in affidavits sworn to by presumably reputable and sober members of the clergy. Practically nobody except folklorists collects these reports anymore, or people like me. Folklorists are interested in them because they represent survivals of older traditional beliefs. As to their status as descriptions of real events, most people shrug and say this is a question for scholars of abnormal psychology or maybe parapsychologists. And the parapsychologists, for their part, say fairy sightings are of interest only to folklorists and psychologists. Well, who can blame anybody for not wanting to get involved in such a disagreement? Even to raise the question about fairies or merbeing sightings is to raise multitudes of eyebrows. Any number of reasons no rational person can fail to think of. Fairies cannot exist, and the descriptions of fairy realms and the life preserved in traditional narratives is clearly fabulous. Not only that, they're so at variance with even a committed supernaturalist to be hard-pressed to fashion a geography of fairyland from such accounts. But could it be that fabulous elements attach themselves to experiences at least perceived as real? Much in the same way those who experienced the old hag attacks, which really happened, attributed to folk cause, such as witch assaults, to them. In her Scottish fairy belief in 2001, two folklorists, Lizanne Henderson and Edward Cowan, remarked it should be possible to believe in one's informants without believing their explanations. They saw something, but what is it they saw? That's the real question. It has to be conceded that the old hag experience is at least partially explainable by known psychological mechanisms, which is to say its degree of strangeness in some ways may be more apparent than real. And there are also, virtually always, single-person experiences. If you're in a bedroom with somebody who's undergoing a hag attack, you'd be unlikely to see the approaching apparition. You'd see no more than the victim lying motionless and staring with a fearful expression. Sightings of fairies and merbeings, on the other hand, typically are said to occur in meetings where hallucinations are tied to sleep not being an issue. The witnesses are mostly individuals otherwise deemed sane and well and consequently not susceptible to dramatic delusions. According to Graham Reed in the Psychology of Anomalous Experience in 1988, hallucinatory content is usually concerned with the fears and conflicts which would be expected from people who are suffering from mental disorder or delirium due to physical health. A number of these sightings, though, involved multiple witnesses, so everybody didn't have the same psychological or physical defect. This just about sums up the case for high strangeness anomalies. Credible persons reporting incredible things and little but sincerity to show for it. This is not the stuff of a scientific revolution. And neither is it, though, an occasion to rush into the vacuum with a naively reductionist explanation that renders the anomalies claim harmless by covering it with a prosaic cause pulled out of a hat, an approach that amounts to the fetishization of current knowledge and expression of faith in the historical proposition that what we know at the moment is all we need to know. At the same time, it's just as unwise to fill the explanatory hole with a scientifically meaningless or overtly supernatural guesswork based on a host of unprovable assumptions about ultimate reality. Ought to be clear through the literature on anomalous phenomena. Shows it's everything but that we do not know why honest individuals in all times and places claim to see things that all evidence and logic tell us don't and cannot exist. Nearly everybody who pays attention to such anomalous testimony can get him or herself worked into an intellectual and emotional knot over it. Human nature abhors an explanatory vacuum. So in the rhetoric of the debate that has raged over one form or another over the centuries, a strange entity or beast gets transformed either into a conventional object or an animal to which it bears no appreciable resemblance, or into an intruder from some magical dimension. If neither explanation seems especially helpful, it's because the question has been framed wrongly. The question ought to not be, though it always is, do bizarre beasts and entities exist? Well, no sensible, all-encompassing answer is possible, and it's futile to pretend otherwise. The question really ought to be, is it possible to have the experience of encountering bizarre beasts and entities? Well, the answer to that, of course, is yes. To respond affirmatively is to acknowledge modestly the obvious, which is, as some folks have put it, weird stuff happens. We're in no way conceding anything about what all this weird stuff might mean. We can grant that people see fairies or mer-beings without for a moment proposing that such creatures are part of the planet's ecology. We simply acknowledge that such sightings are an experience it's possible to have. At the same time, while the actual dynamics of the experience remain unknown so far. Consequently, science is currently constructed as little to offer in the way of an explanation, and occultism has only made it more confusing. The nature of the experiences doesn't need to remain forever inexplicable. With the ever-accelerating accumulation of knowledge in all areas, it's going to be possible sooner or later to place these experiences in a rational perspective as either heretofore unsuspected perceptual anomalies or dramatic glitches in consciousness or glimpses of an otherwise undetected larger reality in which we're likely to have encountered the phrase multiverse. Whether the solution comes from the micro or the macro side of the existential ledger, it's sure to teach us something new and fascinating. Well, not all, or even most anomalous claims are such an extreme variety. On the lower side of the strangeness scale, we find ball lightning, ice falls, possibly surviving thylacines. And while undeniably intriguing mysteries seem unlikely to shake the world, even if answered affirmatively, physicists, meteorologists, wildlife specialists, and others are going to solve these puzzles one day. Newspapers, television, internet, and radio will take notice in a few days, and the phenomenon will then sink from popular review to be revived occasionally on cable TV's ubiquitous nature-themed programs. But if cryptozoologists were to produce a specimen or a body of a Sasquatch or a Mokele-ubembe, a so-called sauropod dinosaur alleged to survive in the remote regions of the Congo, the consequences for anthropology, paleontology, and evolutionary theory would be immense, if only because their presence, while improbable, not impossible, is so unexpected, not just by scientists, but almost everybody else. It's hard to imagine anybody who could not be excited by that. On the other hand, once the serious research on those animal psychology and diet and behavior began, the popular interest would wane, and in time Sasquatch and Mokele-ubembe would be just more fodder for the wildlife documentaries. Same can be said for lake monsters and sea serpents and the like. On the other hand, and discussions of anomalies are nothing if not a long series of on the other hand, as cryptozoologists deal with questions that seem straightforward enough, but become complicated by unwelcome intrusions of high strangest manifestations. Confronted with such reports, such as Loch Ness, most of them related by people seemingly no less sane or sincere than those whose accounts of encounters with less exotic, more zoologically imaginable specimens, cryptozoologists may resort to the same rationalizations they complain about in their critics. Seems in the nature of things, in short, for something thought of as a single anomalous phenomenon to look like two phenomena, one merely fantastic and the other utterly incredible. One seems potentially explainable, more or less, by current or near future science, and the other is absurd or inexplicable, or both. This peculiar duality is apparent even in such relatively sedate manifestations of nature as ball lightning, small luminous spheres that in other contexts would be labeled ball lightning, demonstrate in the testimonies of not just a few witnesses, bewildering and purposeness and intelligence. In an article called Deviant Science, sociologist of science James McLennan remarks on an interview with a man who swore he had seen a small ball of light enter his bedroom after the closed window magically rose up. After sailing about the house, it departed through the front door, which obligingly opened and permitted it to escape. Well, what all this means, of course, is hard to say. We can be assured, though, that this small consideration will stop no committed debunker or believer from saying it anyway. The temptation to reductionism, the witness was dreaming it, or occultism, it was a paranormal being from the etheric realm, is difficult to resist. Common decency and common sense compel us to be courteous to witnesses and to hear them out, no matter how crazy they sound. After all, they were there, we weren't. We can provide a reasonable and extraordinary explanation for what they tell us they've seen. Well, that's fine. If not, we don't need to insult them by reinventing their sightings so as to trivialize them into crude misperceptions of ordinary stimuli. We don't need to ridicule them or call them without evidence to the effect of as liars. Yet the sincerest testimony to the most fantastic event or entity, even if we deem it accurately rendered, is not enough to remake the world on its own. Well, we're going to talk about a lot of weird stuff that happens to people. And we're going to hear everything the witnesses had to say. I mean, frankly, all other approaches, after all, have proven unhelpful and have done nothing but conceal thinly our own ignorance. Radically objective approach that respects that testimony that deserves respect, even when it speaks of the incredible, is all that's left to us. This testimony may or may not tell us an extraordinary truth about the world, but it does tell us something about the peculiar things people have experienced in this world. And there's no question about it, there's a lot of strange things in the world. Well, for the first one we're going to talk about in the short time we got left today, let's go to Oyster Bay, New York. The year is 1975. It was a pleasant summer evening. Science teacher Tom Derrico was in his driveway about to enter his car when he glanced up at the sky. And there, hovering above the roof of his house, he saw a small dark cloud, unlike the occasional cumulocirrus clouds that were floating by at such much higher altitudes. The cloud seemed to move and slightly enlarge as I watched it. He said, this basketball-sized cloud floated back and forth across the peak of the roof, changing in shape from a small globular mass to a larger ovoid, and finally became an abstract, multi-curved, dark vapor or something. Finally measured about 6 feet in height and 1.5 feet in width. Well, stunned and unable to think of a rational explanation for what he was seeing, he watched in disbelief as events took an even stranger turn. The cloud seemed to inhale, purse its lips, and direct a stream of water toward him and the car. Soak them both. After a minute, the spray stopped and the cloud vanished. Well, after changing his clothes, he took his wet shirt to Garden City Junior High School where he worked and ran a pH test on it. There was no question. It was simply water. The event, which sounds like nature's idea of a prank, may or may not be beyond current science's ability to explain. Clouds are capable of peculiar appearance and behavior. In tornadoes, dark days, anomalous precipitation, and related weather phenomena, written by William Corliss. He called from the scientific literature reports of cloud arches, luminous clouds, rumbling clouds, clouds with holes in them, and more. Though highly unusual, these are no doubt mostly or entirely of interest to meteorologists, rather than those seeking evidence of truly inexplicable events in the atmosphere. And what we're going to talk about later, we concern ourselves with the inexplicable events. Instances of clouds so out of the ordinary that some of them, in fact, may not have been clouds at all. There have been falls from the sky of organic and inorganic material that are sometimes associated with extraordinary clouds. One interesting case reported in scientific journals of the period concerned a small, slow-moving, perfectly spherical white cloud that suddenly appeared in an otherwise clear sky northwest of Agen, France, about 11 a.m. in the morning, September 5th, 1814. Within a few minutes, it stopped and remained motionless for a period of time. Then abruptly sped southward, all the while revolving on its own axis and emitting ear-shattering rumbling noises. These climaxed with the explosion of a variety of stones, some of them of impressive dimension. The cloud then ceased its movement and faded slowly away. Comparable events recorded at Savigny, Italy in 1794. Cassigny, France in 1815, Noblesville, Indiana in 1823, and a number of other places. There was an item that appeared in the Adelaide newspaper, South Australian Register, on December 11th, 1844, where it talked about strange things that came out of clouds. Well, keep in mind, no matter how advanced our science may claim it is, we don't know it all. There was a man named Charles Tilden Smith, wrote in the British scientific journal Nature. Although I've studied the skies for many years, never seen anything like it before. And the idiot he was talking about was two triangle-shaped shadows in the clouds. These dark patches maintained their stationary position even as the clouds rolled on. To all appearances, each was a heavy shadow cast upon a thin veil of cloud by some unseen object. Well, there's been a lot of triangular UFOs reported. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about more sightings of the unexplained. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.